In the final years of her life, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky was no longer the fiery rebel traveling across continents or debating scholars in drawing rooms. She was physically weakened, often in pain, and deeply aware that her time in this world was running out. But her spirit burned with greater intensity than ever before. And in this last phase, she wrote a small book, barely 100 pages, that she believed carried the distilled essence of all she had learned, seen, and received from the hidden worlds. That book is The Voice of the Silence. Unlike her monumental works like The Secret Doctrine or Isis Unveiled, this final offering was quiet, poetic, and intensely inward. It wasn't meant to instruct the intellect, it was meant to awaken the soul. Blavatsky claimed she translated it from fragments of the Book of the Golden Precepts, esoteric teachings from Eastern mystics passed down through generations in secret. Most readers have never heard of it. Some theosophists have barely studied it. And yet, it is here, in this forgotten volume, that we find Blavatsky's clearest and most urgent message to humanity. Not about races, or karma, or cosmic cycles, but about compassion, about silence, about the path of the true disciple, not the one who seeks power, but the one who learns to disappear. This is not a book to read with the eyes. It is a book to listen to with the heart. And when we do, we discover something remarkable. Blavatsky's voice, no longer debating the world, finally speaking directly to the soul. The voice of the silence begins not with doctrine, but with a journey, the journey of the soul ascending through the path of renunciation and spiritual awakening. In stark contrast to the often dense symbolic language of her earlier works, this book speaks in clear, direct phrases, yet each line is layered with mystical depth. It presents a threefold path for the seeker. First, the path of hearing, then, the path of reflection, and finally, the path of intuitive insight, or the path of the still small voice. This final path, Blavatsky insists, can only be entered by those who have silenced the distractions of the mind and ego. Only then can one hear the voice that comes not from outside one but from within. She writes, "Before the soul can hear, the image, man, has to become as deaf to all voices as to whispers of the forest, as to both the thunder and the small voice." This is the heart of her final message, that truth is not shouted, it is whispered. It cannot be found in the noise of the world, but in the silence cultivated within. And only the one who has passed through pain, sacrifice, and inner death can recognize that silence for what it is, the sound of the eternal. This idea reflects ancient Buddhist and Hindu concepts of inner realization, but through Blavatsky's words, it gains a distinct urgency, as if she knew that the future would grow louder, faster, more chaotic, and that silence would become the rarest of powers. Blavatsky makes it clear that the voice of the silence is not for the casual reader. It is a guidebook for what she calls the sons of the fire, souls who burn with longing for liberation, not only for themselves, but for all beings. In her eyes, the true spiritual aspirant is not one who climbs the mountain of enlightenment alone, but one who, upon reaching the summit, turns back to help others ascend. One of the most haunting lines in the book states, "Thou canst not travel on the path before thou hast become that path itself." This isn't metaphor, it's a mystical law. The path to truth is not a road laid before us. It is forged through the burning away of illusion, ego, and even identity. The seeker must become empty enough to be filled by something greater. And that process, Blavatsky warns, is painful. It will demand everything. But she also offers hope. Profound, unshakable hope. That behind every veil is light. That beyond every trial is compassion. That every soul is destined to awaken, eventually. Her voice in this book is no longer the voice of the teacher, the lecturer, or the occultist. It is the voice of the initiate, speaking across time to anyone ready to walk the razor's edge of truth. And the closer one listens, the clearer it becomes. This is not about philosophy, it's about transformation. One of the most striking features of the voice of the silence is its rejection of selfish spirituality. Blavatsky attacks the idea of personal enlightenment pursued for private gain. For her, the goal is never escape, it is return. The true adept, she says, does not retreat into bliss while the world suffers. He renounces nirvana in order to serve humanity. This idea is rooted in the Mahayana Buddhist concept of the bodhisattva, the awakened being who vows to remain in the cycle of birth and death until all souls are liberated. Blavatsky lifts this archetype and places it at the center of her esoteric path. She writes, "Compassion is no attribute. It is the law of laws, eternal harmony, Alaya's self, a shoreless universal essence." For her, compassion is not a feeling, it is the vibration of the universe itself, and to align with it is to become a vessel of that infinite current. This radically challenges modern ideas of spirituality as self-care or personal empowerment. Blavatsky reminds us that the highest spiritual achievement is sacrifice, not in a martyrdom sense, but in the sacred act of giving oneself to the healing of the world. In her final book, the silence she refers to is not empty. It is full of responsibility, of clarity, of love beyond sentiment. And the message is clear. Enlightenment is not a destination. It is a vow. In the pages of The Voice of the Silence, Blavatsky turns again and again to the concept of killing the sense of separateness. This, she claims, is the central illusion that binds the soul to suffering. As long as we believe we are isolated, a single mind, a single body, a single life, we remain trapped in a prison of false identity. This teaching echoes the Vedantic idea that the self is not the ego, but Atman, the universal soul. And yet, Blavatsky expresses it in her own poetic, burning way. She demands not only understanding, but inner crucifixion. The seeker must destroy the very foundation of personal identity to awaken to the truth. She writes, "Kill thy desire, kill thy ambition, kill thy life, and if thou livest, then mayst thou live and have a name." To the modern reader, these words may sound harsh, even frightening, but in Blavatsky's context, they are not nihilistic, they are alchemical. They describe a transmutation of consciousness from the personal to the cosmic. What dies is not the self, but the illusion of the self. The silence she speaks of is the silence that follows the death of ego. A silence so profound that only then can the true voice be heard, the voice of unity, of God, of the one life. This is Blavatsky's final medicine for a world sick with division. Not ideology, not belief, but total surrender. Throughout The Voice of the Silence, Blavatsky presents paradox after paradox. To reach the light, you must enter the darkness. To hear the voice, you must embrace silence. To gain everything, you must give up all. These aren't poetic flourishes. They are deliberate tests for the reader's sincerity and depth. She is filtering out the curious from the committed. The book warns that the path is narrow, more difficult to tread than the sharp edge of a razor. Those who seek comfort will turn back. Those who seek truth must risk everything. Yet despite the severity of these teachings, there is a strange gentleness woven between the lines, a kind of sacred encouragement. As if Blavatsky, now aged, physically frail, facing death, is whispering across the veil to the next generation of seekers, "Don't be afraid. Walk on. You are not alone." She writes of the guardian wall, an invisible spiritual barrier built by the compassion of adepts, meant to protect humanity from destroying itself. This wall, she suggests, is made not of magic, but of love. Blavatsky's final message is not elitist. It is intimate. She is not calling us to become gods, but to become servants of the divine, to find power not in dominance, but in disappearance. And she knew the world would grow noisier, so she left us a map, drawn in silence. The silence Blavatsky speaks of is not the absence of sound, but the presence of a higher awareness. It is the space beyond mental chatter, beyond emotional turbulence, where the eternal voice can finally be heard. This is why she urges the reader to merge the mind and soul, to quiet the senses, and to become the vessel through which wisdom flows. In one passage, she writes, Let thy soul lend its ear to every cry of pain, like as the lotus bears its heart to drink the morning sun. This is no small request. It means becoming radically open, vulnerable not only to insight, but to the suffering of all life. Here, we see clearly that the voice of the silence is not an escape from the world. It is a return to it, with new eyes and a purified heart. It calls the seeker to engage not with judgment or superiority, but with fierce compassion. This aligns Blavatsky with the deepest mystical traditions, Christian, Sufi, Hindu, Buddhist, all of which speak of the saint, the mystic, the realized being as someone who no longer lives for themselves, but as a channel for divine will. In her final book, she offers not dogma, but invitation, to listen deeper, to feel wider, to dissolve the boundary between self and other, until only the one remains. It is perhaps the most radical act of all, to be nothing, and yet in that nothingness, become the voice of eternity. Many readers are surprised by how the voice of the silence differs in tone and content from Blavatsky's earlier works. Gone are the encyclopedic references, the intellectual debates, the deep cosmological systems. In their place is something much more distilled, as if Blavatsky near the end had boiled everything down to essence. She no longer tries to convince, she simply reveals. And this is perhaps the most touching aspect of the book. For someone who spent her life challenging materialism, colonial arrogance, and spiritual ignorance, this final offering is almost painfully tender. It shows us not just Blavatsky the teacher, but Blavatsky the human soul. We see a woman who has suffered, who has sacrificed, who has faced ridicule, exile, and illness, and yet still believes in the potential of humanity to awaken. In one of the book's most quoted lines, she says, "The mind is the great slayer of the real. Let the disciple slay the slayer." It is a call to transcend intellect, not to abandon it, but to rise above its illusions. Blavatsky had battled critics and skeptics her entire life, but now she turns inward. The final battle is not with the world, it is with the false self, and the only way to win is to surrender. In the voice of the silence, the figure of the disciple is central, but this disciple is not defined by robes, rituals, or esoteric knowledge. Instead, they are shaped by qualities few would associate with spiritual power: humility, selflessness, endurance, silence. Blavatsky describes 3 halls that the disciple must pass through: the hall of ignorance, the hall of learning, and the hall of wisdom. Each hall represents a stage of inner development. Most of humanity, she says, dwells in the first. Some reach the second, but very few find the third, for its door is hidden within the heart, and it opens only when the seeker has ceased to seek. This is another paradox. The path begins with desire, but it ends in the extinction of desire. Not because desire is evil, but because even the longing for truth must eventually dissolve into truth itself. What's remarkable is that Blavatsky, often accused of being distant or dogmatic, here shows profound psychological insight. She knows how the ego masks itself, even in spiritual ambition. She sees the subtle traps of pride, of secret superiority, of wanting to be advanced, and she tears it all down. The true disciple, she says, becomes invisible. Not because they are erased, but because they have merged with the source of all being. There's a moment in the voice of the silence where Blavatsky writes, "Give up thy life, if thou wouldst live." This statement, like many others in the book, shatters the reader's expectations. It challenges not only our understanding of life and death, but of meaning itself. What does it mean to give up your life? It doesn't necessarily mean to die, but to let go of what you think life is. To abandon the constant grasping for identity, for control, for permanence. This is the heart of all true mysticism. And here, Blavatsky joins the lineage of those who teach that the soul is not something we build, but something we uncover by removing all that is not it. There is a raw courage in this path, one that few are willing to face. It's not the glamour of the occult, not the thrill of mystical powers or secret knowledge. It's the path of becoming nothing in order to become everything. Blavatsky, who had once written about Atlantis, secret masters, and cosmic hierarchies, now speaks only of this: silence, sacrifice, and compassion. She no longer points to other worlds. She points inward. And in that shift, we find her most powerful revelation: that the greatest mystery is not out there, it's within. What makes the voice of the silence so haunting is that it reads like a farewell. There is an urgency in its pages, a sense that Blavatsky knew she would not have time for another great work. She pours what remains of her energy into a transmission, not of knowledge, but of presence. Each sentence feels like a whisper across the threshold of death. And yet, it does not feel morbid. It feels sacred, peaceful, even radiant. It's as if Blavatsky, after a lifetime of storms, finally sat down in stillness and wrote from the eye of the hurricane. Her words carry the weight of someone who has lived, suffered, and emerged on the other side with nothing to prove and everything to give. There's no more argument, no more performance. Only truth, given freely. This book is not for those seeking confirmation. It is for those seeking transformation. And perhaps that's why it was forgotten. It cannot be marketed. It cannot be simplified. It cannot be used to build a following. It is too quiet. But for those who find it, and who are ready, the voice of the silence may speak louder than any of her grander volumes, because it does not call you to learn. It calls you to let go. One of the final themes Blavatsky leaves us with is that of service. Not the kind we do to feel good about ourselves, but the kind that costs everything. She writes of the one who, having reached the light, sacrifices the self to weaker selves. The bodhisattva ideal again. The silent savior who returns to the world, not to preach, but to serve. This is perhaps the most misunderstood part of spiritual evolution. Many think the goal is to escape, to transcend suffering, to reach some personal heaven. But Blavatsky reverses this logic. The highest path, she says, is not the one that frees you, but the one that brings you back, wiser, gentler, and willing to carry the burden of others. This is not martyrdom. It is the flowering of true power, the power that asks for nothing. She writes, "Let not the fierce sun dry one tear of pain before thyself hast wiped it from the sufferer's eye." This is the kind of spirituality she believes the world needs, not visions, not miracles, but a heart that listens, a hand that helps, and a soul that knows. We are one. As the silence deepens in her final book, so too does the invitation to become less, to feel more, to dissolve, and in doing so, to live fully, eternally, without fear. This was Blavatsky's last gift, and perhaps her first real goodbye. In the end, The Voice of the Silence is not just Blavatsky's last book, it is her final offering, her spiritual testament. Not to her followers, not to a movement, but to anyone, anywhere, who is willing to walk the path of silence, surrender, and boundless compassion. It's not a book to be admired, it's a book to be lived. Line by line, it invites us to abandon what is false, to release the illusions of identity, and to awaken the quiet flame of universal love that dwells in every human soul. No longer interested in convincing the world, Blavatsky speaks only to the few, those whose hearts are restless, whose minds have grown weary of argument, whose souls ache for something real. To those who are ready to hear, not her voice, but the voice within themselves. And in doing so, she becomes invisible, just as she taught the true disciple must. She steps out of the spotlight. She leaves no monument behind, only a whisper in the wind and a book so quiet, most never knew it existed. But for those who find it and who truly listen, her message is clear. The path is hard, the world is noisy, but in silence, there is truth. And in compassion, there is power. If this message reached something deep within you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts below. Have you ever heard the voice of the silence? Or are you still searching for it? We'll be reading every comment, because sometimes the quietest voices carry the most light.